Hey Peculiars, it's me, Amanda, the Peculiar Brunette, and today I'm going to be talking about Grimoires versus Book of Shadows. Basically the difference between the two, what they are, and how you can use them in your spiritual practice. This is going to be the first video in a new series that I'm going to be doing on Grimoires, Book of Shadows, Books of Magic, whatever you prefer to call them. And I wanted to give some ideas and inspiration as to what you can do to incorporate things into yours. I know I've spent a lot of time on Pinterest and YouTube really trying to find some good ideas and inspiration, and sometimes I come across some things, but I really thought that there was a lot left to be done. So sometimes I feel like it's either like journaling stuff that you come across, like bullet journaling, or it's just kind of like spreads with no real information or real like guts to it. And I wanted to kind of try to combine both of those and make a new series that would kind of give you guys some inspiration and helpful tips and tricks. I was thinking about doing kind of either like a dollar store or thrift store ideas to make your grimoires, and then maybe just some ideas like different things that you can talk about, different correspondences you can include, and what that might look like. I know a lot of people do the Grimoire like flip through pages. I've come across a lot of those. I don't plan on doing that with my own. I wanted to kind of create some unique ones to give ideas for you guys. So, I mean, if you have something in particular that you want to see, I would really appreciate if you could comment down below and let me know, and then I can make sure and include that. I've lately been having a little bit of analysis paralysis trying to do this series because I have so many ideas and things that I want to do to include. So if I kind of knew what you guys specifically wanted, I can kind of try to narrow in my huge set of ideas. So I really appreciate that. So I actually wrote a blog post about Grimoires versus Book of Shadows on my blog maybe about a couple months ago, maybe May or so, because I really was spending a lot of time. I found a lot of people talking about Grimoires and Book of Shadows, and that you were supposed to use the Grimoires for like correspondences. Like, this is what I would read when I try to figure out the difference. They would say, oh, you know, you have to write correspondences in the Grimoires, you know, your lists of things, deities and whatnot. And then the Book of Shadows was supposed to be more personal, maybe journaling or your thoughts. And then I would read in other places the exact opposite. So I was like, which one's which? I need the legit information. I can't stand it. And different YouTube videos, different blogs, I spent a lot of time reading through stuff, and all the information just seemed to kind of go in different directions. And so I thought, you know what, I'm going to really research this, and I'm going to bring this information to you guys. So before I start in on the difference between the two of them, I really want to be clear that you can call your Book of Magic whatever the hell you want to call it. If you want to call it a grimoire, do it. If you want to call it a Book of Shadows, do it. You can call it whatever you want to call it. I don't care. I'm just trying to give you information so that you can go forward being educated and knowing what the difference is between the two of them. And also, put whatever you want. If you want to have multiple books, you can have multiple for maybe each section, like one about the moon, one about herbs and gardening, maybe one for like kitchen magic, maybe one for deities, whatever you want to do, maybe like holidays or Sabbaths. You can do that too. You can do whatever you want. It's yours. You can feel free to keep it hidden to yourself. You can show it to people if you want. Whatever. I just don't want anybody saying, oh, wow, the Peculiar Brunette, you know, she told me that I'm not allowed to put this in mine. Okay, that's not what I'm saying. So don't put that on me. But I thought that it would be interesting to kind of give you guys, you know, some more history of it and why it is that people say those things. So here we go. I'm going to go into that right now. So people have been recording information for thousands of years, even through illustrations. I think I put it in my botanicals, herbs, and greenery PDF that I have for sale in my Etsy shop. But aloe vera was actually on the walls in some Egyptian pyramids, which I just thought was really cool that they found that to be so valuable that they, you know, illustrated that on there. And they would put it on their skin, which is super helpful for your skin, by the way. In the 1440s, German goldsmith Johannes Gutenberg invented the first printing press, which really started making books become more widely available. And it was when you really start to see books of magic being printed and spread around. The Roman Catholic Inquisition kind of got involved at this point and was trying to basically make sure that those books didn't spread for obvious reasons. But a lot of people still printed them and just kept them secret and safe. When I was trying to find the origination of the word grimoire, I came across Owen Davies, who is a professor at social history at the University of Hertfordshire. And he wrote a book called Grimoires, A History of Magic Books. And he had a little excerpt in there that I wanted to read to you that I thought was really helpful as far as the origination of the word. Okay, so quote, "It more likely derives from the French word grammaire, which originally referred to work written in Latin. By the 18th century, it was being widely used in France to refer to magic books, perhaps because many of them continued to circulate in Latin manuscripts at that time, when most other publications were in French. It was used as a figure of speech to denote something that was difficult to read or impossible to understand, such as, 'It is like a grimoire to me.' It was only in the 19th century, with the educated resurgence of the interest in the occult, that it began to enter general English usage." Okay, now I want to jump back in time just a little bit to 1801, when Francis Barrett published what was called the Magus, which actually on my blog post I have a link to the Magus if you want to read it. It's giant, but basically it's 3 different books that are contained into one single volume. And his whole goal and plan was to modernize information from ancient and obscure texts to make them more accessible in 1801. I really think that it's interesting what he did, because it's kind of where the concept of customizing your grimoire came from, because he took older ideas and kind of modernized them into his own tradition and kind of made it more unique and accessible to that time frame. So I really think that that's where it is, where you take information and you kind of make it your own. And I think that's where the origination of that idea came from. And I just kind of thought that was interesting. Around the late 1800s and early 1900s, English occultists and magical groups began to assemble, like the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn and the Ordo Templi Orientis. So Aleister Crowley, which I think most people have kind of heard of, he was the most famous and influential members of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. I'm going to talk about him a little bit more in just a minute when I talk about the Book of Shadows, but I just want to make sure that that's referenced here. They did kind of that same thing that Francis Barrett did, where they took older ideas and concepts and kind of made them unique to that time period, kind of made them more modernized. A lot of their concepts and beliefs found their way into modern Wicca beliefs. So at this point in time, the grimoire became known as a compilation of magical ideas and occult topics, such as herbs, ritual practices, invocations, elements, etc., etc. Okay, now I'm going to jump in a little bit to the history of the Book of Shadows. And I'm actually going to reference the Llewellyn Encyclopedia article 4702, which again I have linked in my blog post if you want to read it, but I'm going to read the quote here. In 1946, Gerald Gardner was introduced to Aleister Crowley, who I mentioned earlier, and apparently joined one of Crowley's magical orders, the Ordo Templi Orientis, or OTO. Gardner's involvement was somewhat limited by the fact that by the 1940s, the OTO itself was completely inactive in England, and the only initiation Crowley offered at that time consisted of being given copies of the rituals and other papers to read. So that's interesting, because that's showing how Aleister Crowley influenced Gerald Gardner. In 1951, England repealed their witchcraft laws, and so Gerald Gardner was actually published Witchcraft Today with the help of High Priestess Doreen Valente, and they created Wicca. So Gardner had his own grimoire, or book of magic, whatever you prefer to call it, and he kept his information regarding his rituals and beliefs, but he wanted to create his own book that was his own personal knowledge, nothing that was handed down to him, but basically stuff that he created that was his own beliefs, his own rituals. and that he could share with his coven. So after his death, some of his early work and his early writings in creating his own book was called Ye Book of Ye Art Magical was found, but it wasn't completely finished. According to the high priestess, Doreen Valente, Gerald Gardner was thinking of calling it a Book of Shadows because he had read an article in an occult magazine that gave him the idea. The members of his original coven used his Book of Shadows and tried to keep it secret and hidden to those who weren't initiated in their coven. However, nowadays you can do a quick Google search and you can find it, which again, I linked that in my blog post in case you wanted to read it or see anything that's included in it. Now, some covens prefer to adhere really closely to Gardner's original traditions and only have one copy that's held by the high priestess and it's kept guarded and secret. And then basically those who are initiated in it are the only ones that are allowed to read it, basically for, I think, continuity and, privacy and respect. In more modern times, a lot of people practice, solitary, and so they don't really consult or speak to a high priestess or somebody else in their spirituality. So they can kind of do whatever they want. They have a lot more freedom on what they want to include or not. Some people choose to not do any spell work. Somebody like me, I don't really do spell work, and they refrain from keeping it in their Book of Shadows, but the choice is totally up to you. You can keep whatever you want in it. So basically, the conclusion is that Grimoire, Book of Shadows, you can call it whatever you want. What I found in my research is it's a little bit of older term to call it the Grimoire, and it's typically, if you are Wiccan or follow Wicca, that you call it the Book of Shadows. Now, again, that is not a hard and fast rule. You're welcome to do whatever you want. And I do think it's worth mentioning that both of those terms are really of European descent when you really trace back and look at them. So I think that was kind of interesting. I thought for sure that when I heard Grimoire, I just thought that was going to be not of European descent. I don't know where I thought, but not European. So I thought that was kind of interesting that came across in my studies. So I hope that helps. If you guys have any questions, feel free to comment down below and I can make sure and go into more detail on it. If not, stick around, hit that subscribe button, and I'll do some more posts on Grimoire, Book of Shadows, magical books. And remember, as always, stay peculiar, guys.